I had no intention of concealing my accomplishments while growing up in Australia. That's precisely how it happened. In addition to working hard to support me, my parents instilled in me the value of education and tenacity. Maria, knowledge is the one thing no one can take away from you. My father used to say often, after long nights driving his taxi to pay for my education. My mother worked 2 jobs, and together they made sure I had everything I needed to thrive. Their sacrifices paid off. I graduated at the top of my class in finance and secured a job at one of Asia's largest banks. By the time I was 29, I had become the youngest division head in the bank's history, managing over $100 billion in corporate loans. Despite these accomplishments, very few people knew about my professional life. I preferred to keep things simple and let my work speak for itself. On weekends, I liked helping out at my friend's small cafe. It was my way of staying grounded and taking a break from the pressures of corporate life. One rainy morning, a man named Scott walked into the cafe. He ordered a latte, and I added a little heart to the foam as a small touch. When I handed it to him, he smiled warmly and said, "This is the best coffee I've had in months." "The secret is making it with care," I replied, smiling back as I wiped down the counter. Scott started coming back every weekend after that. Over time, we struck up conversations about everything: his job as an architect, his dreams of designing sustainable buildings, and his strong bond with his family. I found myself looking forward to his visits. He didn't seem to care about material things or the size of my paycheck. He valued me for who I was, not what I owned. When he finally asked me out, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Our first date was at a humble hawker center. We shared plates of charro and laughed about little things. It wasn't fancy, but it felt perfect. I fell in love with Scott's kindness, his honesty, and the way he treated everyone with respect, no matter who they were. Before meeting his family for the first time, Scott gave me a heads up. "My family is a bit traditional," he admitted. "They can be judgmental about things like career and status." "Don't worry," I told him confidently. "I can handle it." Little did he know, my success wasn't something I felt the need to flaunt. I was happy keeping things low-key, enjoying life as it came and finding joy in the simple moments, like the ones I shared with Scott. I wasn't ready for Brandon Rolfe, Scott's father. He was a self-made real estate tycoon who commanded attention the moment he entered a room. His presence was overpowering, and his confidence seemed unshakable. His wife, Madison, was just as intimidating, always dressed in designer clothes, her hair styled to perfection. Then there was Scott's sister Lauren, who had inherited her mother's sharp looks and an equally sharp tongue. When I mentioned that I worked at a cafe, her dismissive glance said it all. A cafe. Brandon's voice boomed across the dinner table. "Scott, I thought you said she went to university." "She did, Dad. Maria has a degree in, clearly not putting it to good use." Brandon interrupted. "In this family, we value ambition and excellence, not serving coffee." I noticed Scott's face turn red, but he didn't say a word. Madison, seated gracefully at the table, touched her pearl necklace, a sign I later learned meant she was about to say something cutting. "Dear," she began, her tone dripping with false sweetness, "perhaps you could help Maria find a more suitable job. The cleaning company we use is always hiring." Lauren chuckled and added, "At least she'd get health insurance." Despite their remarks, I kept my composure. Years of handling high-pressure negotiations had taught me to stay calm. "I enjoy my work at the cafe," I replied with a polite smile. "But thank you for your concern." The rest of the dinner was a blur of subtle insults and patronizing advice. On the drive home, Scott apologized repeatedly. "They'll come around," he promised. "They just need time to get to know you." But they didn't. Over the next year, as Scott and I grew closer, his family's disdain only grew stronger. Every family gathering felt like a test of endurance. Brandon never missed a chance to remind everyone of my lowly job. Madison made sure I was seated far from important guests at dinners. Lauren openly suggested Scott find someone more suitable. When Scott proposed, their reaction was exactly what I expected. "A cafe worker," Brandon roared. "Have you lost your mind?" "Dad, I love her," Scott said firmly. "Love won't maintain our family's reputation," Brandon snapped. "If you marry her, don't expect any support from me." But Scott stood by me. We had a small, beautiful wedding without his family. In the months that followed, I continued working at the cafe on weekends, finding peace in the simple routine. While managing billion-dollar deals during the week, Scott understood my choice to keep my career private. He loved me for who I was, not for what I earned. Then came the annual Rolfe family reunion. "We have to go," Scott insisted. "They're still my family." Reluctantly, I agreed, hoping they might have softened over time. I was wrong. The reunion was held at Brandon's massive mansion, a sprawling estate that exuded wealth and status. From the moment we arrived, I knew this wasn't going to be easy. As we walked into the Rolfe family reunion, I felt the familiar sting of judgmental stares from across the garden. Lauren's sharp voice rang out loud enough for everyone to hear. "Oh, the cafe girl is still around. Still no real job, I see." How persistent. Her words were met with scattered laughter, and I forced myself to stay calm, even though my hands clenched at my sides. Brandon, standing at the center of the gathering, raised his glass and called for attention. His annual family address had begun, with champagne flowing and his booming voice recounting the family's many successes. He reveled in their achievements, speaking as if their accomplishments were unmatched. Then his eyes landed on us. "Ah, Scott, come here. Tell everyone about your latest project," he said, waving Scott over. His gaze barely flickered in my direction before he added with a smirk, "And your wife can serve drinks. It's what she's good at, isn't it?" Laughter erupted around us, but before Scott could respond, a sudden commotion broke out near the house. Brandon's secretary hurried over, her face pale. "Mr. Ralph, there's an urgent call from the bank." "Not now," Brandon barked, waving her away. "We're celebrating." "Sir, it's about the emergency loans," she said, her voice trembling. "They've been denied." Brandon froze, his confident smile vanishing. "Impossible," he muttered. "I spoke with the division head yesterday." The secretary continued. "The new CEO is personally reviewing all of your loans. They requested a meeting tomorrow." I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. My secretary calling. I stepped away to answer, already suspecting the reason for the call. "Ma'am," my secretary said quietly, "Shin Developments has been flagged for major accounting irregularities. The audit shows systematic misrepresentation of assets." I nodded, keeping my voice calm. "Send me the files. I'll review them tonight." When I returned to the party, chaos had taken over. Brandon was no longer the commanding figure he'd been earlier. His face had turned pale, and he was shouting into his phone, while Madison hovered nearby, wringing her hands. Lauren approached me, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Looks like Daddy's company is in trouble. Not that you'd understand anything about business matters. More champagne." I smiled politely. "No, thank you." But I do have a question. How's your position at your father's company? Lauren straightened, her smug expression faltering slightly. I'm the executive vice president of operations. Interesting, I replied, tilting my head. And what exactly do you do? Her smile faltered further, and for once she was at a loss for words. It was a rare moment of satisfaction in a long evening filled with condescension. I manage important things, like the shell companies in the Turks and Caicos Islands, I said casually, locking eyes with Lauren. Her glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the marble floor. Heads turned toward us, but she quickly hissed, I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, you know, I replied, my tone light. The ones hiding your father's debt, or maybe the inflated property valuations. Before she could respond, Brandon's booming voice cut through the garden. Everyone, the party's over. Family emergency. Guests began murmuring and trickling out. As the crowd thinned, Brandon turned to Scott, pulling him aside. Son, he began, his voice tense, I need your help. The bank is being unreasonable. Your architecture firm has good connections with other banks, doesn't it? Scott looked uneasy, shifting his weight. Dad, we're a small firm. We don't handle loans like that. Useless, Brandon snapped, his voice rising. Just like your choice of wife. If I lose this company, it's your fault for bringing bad luck into this family. That was it. I couldn't stay silent any longer. Stepping forward, I held up my phone. Mr. Ralph, I said calmly, I believe we have a meeting tomorrow morning at 9. He barely glanced at me, his frustration obvious. This doesn't concern you, coffee girl. Actually, it does, I said, opening my banking app and showing my executive profile. I'm the CEO you'll be meeting. The silence that followed was absolute. Brandon's face morphed from confusion to disbelief to outright horror. Madison's pearl necklace slipped from her hand, clattering to the ground. Lauren looked as though she might faint. That's impossible, Brandon stammered. Maria Chun, CEO of the corporate banking division at Australia United Bank. I said, keeping my voice steady. Your loan applications crossed my desk last week, and the irregularities were concerning. Scott stared at me, his mouth slightly open. Maria, he began, his voice soft. All this time, I smiled gently. I wanted to be loved for who I am, not for what I own, I explained. You gave me that. Your family, on the other hand, not so much. Brandon straightened up abruptly, his businessman instincts taking over. Well, this is wonderful news, he said, forcing a smile. We're all family here. Surely we can work something out. Family? I repeated, arching an eyebrow. Like when you called me a gold digger at our wedding. Or when you told your business associates that Scott had married beneath his station. Madison stepped forward, her arms outstretched in an almost pleading gesture. Darling, we were only trying to protect our son, she said sweetly. Surely you understand. I tilted my head, studying her. Protect him, I said with a faint smile. Funny, it feels more like protecting your ego. But don't worry, I'll protect Scott now. Your company, though, that's a different story. I understand perfectly, I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. You judged me, humiliated me, and treated me like I wasn't good enough because you thought I was beneath you. And now you want my help. Lauren stepped forward, trying to smooth things over. Maria, sweetie, we were just teasing. It was all in good fun. I ignored her and turned to Scott. Did you know about your sister's role in the company? Scott shook his head, confusion clear on his face. She said she was managing operations. I nodded, keeping my tone steady. She's been helping your father hide debt and inflate assets. The audit shows years of financial manipulation. Brandon's face turned a deep shade of purple. Now, wait just a minute. You can't just. I can, I interrupted firmly. And I will. Tomorrow's meeting isn't about loans, Mr. Ralph. It's about fraud. His face went pale, the bluster draining from him. You wouldn't dare, he sputtered. Family, I said softly, shaking my head. Let me tell you something. My father, yes, the taxi driver you mocked at my wedding, taught me true family supports you, believes in you, and loves you no matter your status. You've done none of those things. I reached for Scott's hand, holding it tightly. The authorities will be in touch tomorrow. I suggest you prepare your lawyers. As we turned to leave, Madison's voice rang out, desperate. Wait, what about Lauren? She was just following orders. I stopped at the door, glancing back. Actions have consequences, Madison. Lauren made her choices. She'll face the same investigation as everyone else. The car ride home was silent for a while. Finally, Scott broke the quiet. Why didn't you tell me? I sighed, glancing at him. Would you have treated me differently if you knew? He thought for a moment, then shook his head. No. I fell in love with you, not your job. That's exactly why I fell in love with you, too, I smiled softly, squeezing his hand. I'm sorry for keeping this from you. I just needed to know that our love was real. Scott nodded, his expression thoughtful. So what happens now? I exhaled, knowing the road ahead would be difficult. Your father's company will face a full investigation. With the evidence we've gathered, there will likely be criminal charges. Lauren, too, if she's found responsible. And us? Scott asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. I smiled gently. That depends. Can you handle being married to a woman who earns more than your entire family combined? Scott laughed, the tension breaking at last. I think I'll manage. But no more secrets, okay? I smiled, leaning my head on his shoulder. No more secrets. As the city lights blurred past the car window, I felt a sense of relief. The truth was out, and while the future was uncertain, I knew Scott and I would face it together. The next morning, everything began to fall apart for the Chin family. At precisely 10 o'clock a.m., Brandon arrived at my office, flanked by his lawyers. The confident, arrogant tycoon I had seen so many times before was gone. In his place was a man who had finally realized he was no longer the most powerful person in the room. I slid the audit report across my desk, keeping my tone steady. The investigation uncovered systematic fraud spanning 6 years. Falsified property valuations, hidden debts, shell companies. It's all documented here. One of his lawyers attempted to intervene. We can explain. There's no need, I interrupted, my voice firm. This evidence has already been forwarded to the authorities. Brandon leaned forward, his voice pleading. Maria, please think about what this will do to the family name. I met his eyes, unflinching. Like you thought about my reputation when you told everyone I was a gold digger. Before he could respond, my secretary entered the room. Ma'am, the police are here. What followed was a media frenzy. Headlines screamed the downfall of the Chin family empire. Chin Development CEO arrested for fraud. Cameras captured Brandon being escorted out of the building, his face pale and his head bowed. Hours later, Lauren was also taken into custody, clutching her designer handbag tightly as officers led her away. Madison, unable to handle the disgrace, had a very public meltdown at the country club. Scott stayed by my side through it all, though I could see the pain in his eyes as his family crumbled. One evening, as we watched the relentless news coverage, he took my hand. "They did this to themselves," he said quietly. "You just exposed the truth." Weeks turned into months, and the investigation uncovered even more than I had anticipated. Brandon had been running an elaborate scheme using inflated property valuations to secure massive loans and channeling the money through shell companies. Lauren, far from being a passive participant, had played a key role in coordinating the fraud. Her position as executive vice president had been little more than a cover. The trial was swift. Brandon was sentenced to 9 years in prison, and Lauren received 6. Madison avoided criminal charges, but lost everything during the asset forfeitures. The family's sprawling mansion and luxury cars were seized, leaving her with nothing. One crisp autumn day, as golden hues blanketed Australia's gardens, Madison showed up at my office. Her once flashy designer outfits had been replaced with simple cotton. Her expression was a mix of exhaustion and regret. "I know I have no right to be here," she began, her voice trembling. "But I need to say something." I gestured for her to continue, curious about what she had to say after everything that had happened. "I was wrong about you," Madison began, her voice trembling as tears filled her eyes. "So terribly wrong. We judged you because we thought wealth and status were everything. But now I'm alone, living in a small apartment, working as a sales clerk. And I finally understand character matters more than money." Her hands shook as she continued, her words heavy with regret. "You were kind to us even when we were cruel to you. You could have destroyed us completely, but instead you let the law do its job. That's real class." I studied her face, searching for any sign of insincerity, but all I saw was genuine remorse. For the first time, Madison seemed vulnerable, even human. "What do you want?" I asked quietly. She wiped her tears and looked down. "A chance. I know I don't deserve one, but I'd like the chance to apologize to you and Scott properly and to try to be better." 7 months later, we hosted a small dinner party at our home. Madison arrived carrying a tray of homemade dumplings, a skill she had learned in her simpler, humbler life. She was different now. There was no pretense, no haughty air. She was genuine, softer, and much more grounded. Scott was healing too. He had begun visiting his father and sister in prison, trying to mend the broken pieces of his family and working through years of dysfunction. As for me, I continued working weekend shifts at the cafe, not because I needed to keep my career private anymore, but because I genuinely loved the simplicity of it. Making someone's day with a perfectly brewed cup of coffee. One morning, a young woman came into the cafe. She looked tired and defeated. "Rough day?" I asked, drawing a heart in the foam of her latte. "My boyfriend's parents think I'm not good enough," she sighed. "Wrong background, wrong job." I smiled, remembering my own journey. "Let me tell you a story about family pride and what really matters. Life has a way of teaching us its most valuable lessons in unexpected ways. For Brandon and Lauren, it took prison to realize their mistakes. Madison learned through humility and starting over. And I learned that being true to yourself is worth more than any amount of wealth or status. Scott and I are expecting our first child now. We've decided to name her Olivia, a reminder that even in the hardest situations, mercy and forgiveness can make all the difference. Madison is excited to become a grandmother, and even Brandon, through his letters from prison, seems to be reflecting on the kind of legacy he truly wants to leave behind. The cafe still stands, a quiet reminder of where our story began. Sometimes customers recognize me as the banking CEO who serves coffee on weekends. They often ask why I still do it. I simply smile and say, because it's where I feel most at peace. People often ask me why I still work at the cafe. My answer is simple. Every cup of coffee is a chance to make someone's day a little better. At the end of our lives, isn't that what really matters? They usually smile, whether they understand or not. But I know my truth. Success isn't about power, revenge, or proving others wrong. It's about staying true to yourself, being kind even when it's hard, and believing that everyone, even those who hurt us, deserves a chance to change. As I write this, I'm sitting in the cafe, watching the sunrise cast a soft glow over the city. It feels like a fresh start, every day full of hope. Scott will join me soon, as he does every weekend. Madison might stop by too, bringing her homemade dumplings. Life isn't perfect, but it's real, full of lessons learned and second chances. Sometimes, as I make coffee or review billion-dollar deals, I think about my father's words. Knowledge is the one thing nobody can take from you. Although he was correct, he overlooked something. No one can take away your integrity, kindness, or the bravery to be loyal to who you are. And those, in my opinion, are the best indicators of success.